Jesse the Imaginer here. Conversations on culture and craft. I'm here with the man, the myth, the legend, Carlos Chavez, Executive Director of Morpheus Youth Project. In the place to be. Thanks for joining me, Carlos.
Right on, man. Thank you for having me on, man. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I just think this is a pretty awesome platform that you got going on here. So
I interviewed Merck, and I was like, man, who do I got to interview about just who's just inundated in hip hop culture and making a difference in our communities? Like, you got to interview Carlos. And I was like, no brainer right there. So this is our second episode. And I just wanted to start out with just if you could speak from your heart and your perspective about what's currently going on. This is June 1st, 2020. Not only are we in a pandemic, but we also are going through as a culture grieving the murder of George Floyd and other black bodies. And rightfully so, there's protests going on in our own city and across the country.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy. It's really, to me, just ridiculous that this is still occurring. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't, and it's funny because a lot of folks from the younger generation might think that this is something that's kind of newer, but this is something that's been happening, every few decades. During the 1960s, you had the Watts uprising, which sparked other forms of resistance throughout the country. You saw it again in the 90s after the Rodney King verdict. And that's a recent history that a lot of people don't even know about.
Yeah.
And South Central Los Angeles, that was way bigger than the Watts riot. That took over a whole area of Los Angeles. And moving forward onto to Ferguson, even more recent history. The issue is that folks are upset about something, and with all of the history that I just named, it's the same issue that everybody is dealing with. With the Watts riots, there was a black motorist who had been stopped, and the police started to beat on, and the neighborhood came out, and that turned into what later was called the Watts uprising or the Watts riots, whichever perspective you look at it. Rodney King was a motorist that was beat by five policemen, and that was the first time that it was caught on camera. I remember when that happened, and I remember just going, yeah, like someone finally caught this on camera. Folks are finally going to see what the police have been doing to people. Like I remember that being the feeling that so many people had, like, yes, they got it. Like it's clear. It's undeniable what's going on, and then to see the cops get off, that I think that just blew everyone away. They're like, wow, we got this on camera for the first time. It's a clear violation of this person's rights, and nothing's being done about it. And that caused an explosion. People were like, I can't believe this. That's why the Black Panthers were around in the 1960s. A big reason why they organized and other people like them organized was because of police brutality. Things like this are going to continue to happen as long as we don't address the institution of racism that exists within this country. It's as simple as that. And we've been ignoring it forever. And that's because there's too many people that have power, that want to retain that power and want to keep it within that framework. This country was built on institutional racism and white supremacy, So, the folks that are in power don't want that to change. They stand to benefit from that. And to tell you the truth, when that gets addressed, that's going to change everything.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. That's going to change the way that law enforcement, it's going to change their regular tactics and their philosophy. It's going to change how schools are run. It's going to change how incarceration is dealt with. It's going to deal with a whole host of different social ills that we have. These are just symptoms of a larger problem that we're seeing. No doubt. So yeah, the root of it. It's interesting that we're right in the middle of a pandemic, because it's kind of an interesting analogy to the whole situation. You know, we have a pandemic of racism that exists, you know, and it's going to continue to resurface, and we're going to continue to have outbreaks, you know, just like COVID is going to continue to have outbreaks if we don't really address, you know, if we don't get testing done, if we don't get, you know what I mean, if we're not doing what we need to do to address it, you know. So
no doubt, I appreciate that historical perspective and just the literal metaphor that the COVID pandemic is for racism. I never made that connection. Yeah, man.
On my Puerto Rican side, so my mom's side is Puerto Rican, my dad's side is Mexican, and we spent a lot of time on both sides of the family in those different areas. And it's funny because at the time in East San Jose, that was like the large Mexican population, and then like Fremont and like Union City and areas around that area was where you would find more of your Puerto Rican population. I grew up down there, and then during middle school, I got my family moved to the Central Coast. That's when my parents ended up splitting up. So, you know, I lived in the Central Coast for a little while. I lived in Cambria, California, which is a beautiful little place. I lived in Paso Robles, California. Lived in Arizona for a brief little moment, and then came back to California. And then I kind of just bounced back and forth because my dad lived in the Central Coast, and then my mom was living in the Bay Area. So I kind of like, I went to school in Paso Robles, and then I graduated from high school in Santa Clara, California, in the Bay Area. So it was kind of a mix, you know. I had a lot of stuff going on in my youth, you know. But
how did your story collide with hip hop?
So yeah, that's actually where I was about to step into next.
Same way.
I've been fortunate growing up in California that I was able to kind of come in contact with hip hop at some of its earliest stages. You know, like when it first hit the West Coast, I was living there, you know, and I remember, so when I was a little kid is when it first kicked off.
Yeah.
And, you know, it had already taken off in New York, obviously, you know, and that's when, and at the time that it hit the West Coast was when that movie Flashdance came out. And especially when that movie Beat Street came out, for me anyway.
This is
84 or 85. I was like 10 years old, you know?
Yeah.
10 years old in elementary school. And I got into breaking. You know, it's a trip because I used to do, so there's a couple of early memories that I have from hip hop culture in terms of being involved in it. I remember I had a neighbor who had a Smurf lunchbox record player. Like you open it up and it's like this little miniature record player. And my first album that I ever got was New Edition's first album, and Mr. Telephone Man and all that on it.
Yep.
And I used to scratch on his record player. You know, that's how I learned
little
how to scratch.
Smurf record player.
Yeah, with one of those little record players. And he was always nervous that it was gonna break, but I was just like, I was really feeling like the whole scratching thing, you know. And I used to mess my dad's records up too, you know. I grew up, my family listened to a lot of stuff that influenced hip hop, you know, Earth, Wind and Fire, a lot of Motown, Stevie Wonder, Gladys Knight and the Pips, but also another area that influenced hip hop. And this is interesting because I didn't realize this until later, but salsa. My family used to have huge parties, and it's funny because I later started learning the history of hip hop from like a Puerto Rican perspective, you know, and you know, a lot of the early breakers, definitely the early rockers were Puerto Ricans, you know, Charlie Rock.
Are you talking in New York or is this?
Yeah, in New York. You had a lot of
totally.
folks that were rocking. They were rocking. Rocking came first. And actually, rocking kind of influenced more than just breaking. It influenced, you know, house music. It's influenced like hip hop, club dance styles, popping, like locking. That whole wrist roll. That's something that came from rocking. You know what I mean? You do a wrist roll. A lot of times it was like you had a butterfly knife. You know what I mean? That you're stabbing with, you know what I mean, while you're doing your dance, you know what I mean? Boom, you pull out a butterfly, twirl it, and stab somebody with it, you know? But people were doing wrist rolls anyways, you know? that was just part of the dance. And in different boroughs, they were doing it different ways. Anyways, I'm jumping around.
No, it's cool, man, because you're giving like a broader perspective. Like, what do you mean though? You were recently learning the Puerto Rican history.
Well, there's a really good documentary called From Mambo to Hip Hop, and they break down how, you know, in New York, that borough, the South Bronx, was originally like a white neighborhood, and between like the 50s and the 70s, there was a big migration of black folks moving into that area. Well, it wasn't just African Americans, you know. There was a lot of like Jamaicans. There was a lot of people from the Caribbean, which included Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, you know, and others, you know, which are more Latin rooted, you know. And so Puerto Ricans and African Americans made up 2/3 of the population in the South Bronx. It used to have been, I believe, Jewish, German, and like Irish or Italian. It was that, and then, you know, white flight happened as folks started to move into that area, and then you had predominantly black, you know, African and Afro-Latino populations that were there, and the Afro-Latinos were listening to mambo. Was basically invented by a guy named Machito, it was the first time that somebody had mixed Afro-Cuban music with big band jazz music, and it created a whole new sound.
And that's Mamba?
And there used to be, yeah, Mambo. And then people used to have dance-offs at the Palladium in New York. And I'm not as familiar with where the exact locations of these different places are. I've heard that the Palladium was like in the Manhattan area, I believe. But they used to have big dances where people would get down, and it was like it was a lot of it was improvisation, you know. There are certain dance steps to mambo, but there was a lot of improvisation that was happening. And then the understudies of Machito, like Tito Puente, went on to create a new sound later that became salsa, which was, and it still incorporated jazz, but it was just a more modern version of it, you know. And then you had like the Fania All-Stars came out of that, which Tito Puente was part of. God, my mind always blanks when I'm in the middle of these interviews like this, but like the Fania All-Stars had a whole, it was literally that. It was an all-star cast of all of these amazing, like Cuban, Puerto Rican, you know, Caribbean musicians. That Celia Cruz, like my family used to have huge house parties, you know, and I remember like making my way through the dance floor, and everyone's just like getting down around me, you know, and I'm just trying to get through the floor to get to the other side of the you know, the living room or whatever. I also had an uncle who played Puerto Rican music. He was part of a 12-piece band, my Uncle Mano. He played the cuatro, and so that was stuff that I grew up around. But it wasn't until later that I started to learn the history behind stuff like salsa step, which is a dance step, breaking dance step. Start going into the roots of that, but especially when I started learning about rocking history, I started to understand how other styles of music really influenced that. And so, if you learn how to rock dance, then like you start to understand that there's a lot of like salsa in that. And so like folks literally, I mean, I love to rock to salsa music. Like now I'll throw on Fania music and I'll rock to that. You know what I mean? I'll rock it, like an early breaking form to it, because I don't know how to dance salsa, but I can fake it by kind of rock dancing my way through it, you know.
Can you show a few basic rock moves?
All right, I'll do my best, but it's hard to show you with the camera the way it is, but it's like
little taste.
They're basically like rocking has like a freestyle element of it. You can't really see my feet, but you're kind of doing like these steps where it's like a step forward and then back. It's kind of like a cross step almost. You know, and you're doing, you know, steps like this. You also doing side step movements like this. You know, there's little things, little details that are happening with your feet, so you can't really see what's happening with your feet. Or, you know, even just a cross step, a simple cross step can be part of that, you know. And usually you're just kind of getting down, you know, you twirl, you know, you might even do some little burns. Burns are a big part of the dance. Burns are like, you know, throwing a punch at somebody, throwing an elbow at somebody, you know, a knee, pulling their head off, throwing it up in the air. Those are burns, you know, or even taking out a gun and shooting it, you know, boom, pow, pow, you know, but to the beat, you know what I mean?
No doubt.
And then so that's like your freestyle part, you know, as you're kind of doing this, you know, and everybody has their different way of kind of grooving it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the beat will hit, and that's when you start to rock, and that's when you boom, 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 boom. So it's like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and usually you drop all the way. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you're going all the way to the ground, and you come up, and everyone kind of drops at the same time, you know. So it looks cool when it happens.
No doubt.
But yeah, that's
and then that became a part of b-boying. Just was like what's known as up rocking, was basically just taking those rocking moves before you go into your power move.
Well, my understanding of the history behind that is that someone was rocking, like there were some of the earlier steps was that, you know, sometimes they would do like a rocking step, or, you know, part of their freestyle or what have you, but somebody would like do it like almost like a side step, come down, and then kind of open their legs, come back up, and that was like the first like step that anybody had done on the ground, really. And it came from, you know, rocking, and eventually people got more intricate with those steps, and then that became kind of the early footwork, you know, that we know of today. And so and then, you know, for like breaking, the most like everything in breaking has been done before except for footwork, you know. There are certain steps that have been done before in footwork, but as a form of dance, footwork is completely unique to breaking, you know. And, you know, when I'm talking about footwork, there's different elements to breaking. There's top rock, which is basically just dancing on your feet up top. Some form of that has been done. Like a lot of top rock comes from Lindy Hop, tap dancing, salsa, you know, mambo, these different steps. And of course rocking, you know, which is kind of a mixture of a lot of those things too. Rocking had a big influence. The dance form kind of hardened and got more physical, and kind of evolved throughout the years to become more top rock, what we call top rock today. And then, you know, when you go down, you know, you're going to the floor and you're doing lots of footwork movements, like the 6-step, 3-step, you know, CCs, you know, different things like that. That's footwork, you know. And then you got your big moves, which are power moves. And that's basically, for the most part, like capoeira, you know, and gymnastics, you know what I mean? So those are your big moves, but that stuff's been done before. Top rock's been done before that. And even like the freezes, you know what I mean? They're pretty unique to breaking, but, you know, like, I mean, I don't know if yoga came first, you know, but it's like, and I don't even like to compare the two, really, to tell you the truth, because it's not the same, you know. But you know, there's just different things that have existed before, whereas footwork is, you know, true to breaking, you know.
No doubt.
And the other thing that's beautiful about breaking is that, like, breaking can pull from any dance form. You know, this is something that a friend of mine, Tombo from New Birth Crew, had pointed out before. I never had thought about it that way before, but with breaking, you can pull from any style of dance. You know, you can be influenced and you can incorporate that into breaking, but you can't incorporate breaking into other forms of dance.
That's interesting.
So
it's kind of like the hip hop as music. You can sample from any genre and make that a part of your hip hop beat, and you can spit rhymes over that, but not necessarily the other way around.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So that's cool.
Well, I mean, my first influence, like I said, was I used to pop and break when I was younger, and I really was just emulating other folks around me. But I did have older guys in the community that were teaching us. And here's an interesting story too, that I like to tell whenever I have a chance in terms of breaking. Breaking today, I remember I used to help supervise the breakers over at David Douglas High School, and they used to always complain like, "Oh man, I don't want to break in the cafeteria," you know, because there was always like gummy bears mashed into the ground, and it just wasn't very clean. But I used to tell them all the time, like, man, when I was a kid, we'd be lucky if we had a place like this to break. When I was a kid, they banned breaking at my school, because they said that it looked too much like a fight, and they were nervous about it, you know, because of
too
its
aggressive.
Like, too aggressive, yeah, and it was just ignorance to what it was. You know, people were
Yep.
just ignorant to what it was, and like in front of the classrooms, it was really smooth concrete, you know, and everyone would come out of classroom looking for people to battle. It was so funny, man. It's like all the breakers would just try to, whoever they would find first, you know, it was like, we're getting down right now, you know what I mean? And that was like our way of getting off that steam,
Getting that energy out.
Yeah, getting that energy out was to break, you know. And it was a combination at the time of popping and breaking, you know, so it wasn't like I was doing a lot of, you know, movements up top, you know, different kinds of like popping and tutting and all that, as well as doing like Broncos and different styles of footwork. I don't know, I don't remember. I think my footwork was really just kind of like a bastardized version of footwork. I had like power moves down a lot better, you know.
Like, could you do the windmill?
I know that was when I can now, but when I was a kid, that was the one move I was learning to do before I kind of stopped breaking. And eventually, when I got back involved in it, when I met, you know, Merck and a lot of those guys, I ended up finally learning how to do it, you know. So, but yeah, my power moves are pretty limited, you know, because I'm not like, I took a hiatus from breaking, from like seriously breaking, you know. I was doing it when I was 10. And I didn't do it again until I was like 37, 38, you know what I mean? So that's a huge gap, you know, between in time. So like I just imagine, but I imagine what it would have been. Well, but things had changed so much, things had evolved so much that everything I knew from when I was younger, even if I had remembered and could even do, a lot of it was now like, those are fundamental moves, you know, so it's not like you're going to throw those in a round, you know what I mean? You're not going to throw those fundamental moves in a round. You're going to have elevated it and created something new around it, you know, and that's where things had evolved so much that a lot of the guys had to teach me, like, basically they're like, we're going to teach you new school. That's what they taught me. That's what they would tell me. We're going to teach you new school. I was like, all right, cool. So I just opened up to it and became a student of, so here I am, a 38-year-old guy learning from guys that are, you know, 16, 17, you know, but I loved it, you know, because it was, they reintroduced me to something that I had so much passion for as a youth, you know.
That's what's up.
Yeah, well, you know, and what happened was like, one of the reasons that I stopped breaking, and a lot of people stopped breaking, was that it just became really played out. It got commodified, or, you know what I mean, like it got co-opted, you know, and pretty soon then you had your breakdance instruction videos, you know, you had you know, different folks coming out with videos, and you had like contemporary dance teachers that were like, oh, I can teach this, but they knew nothing about the culture, you know. So it got really homogenized, and then it just also got like, it got global, you know, which was a good thing, but it got co-opted, so the authenticity, you know, went away, and it just became this thing that was used for advertisements, you know. And a lot of ways that's something that still has kind of carried on into today, you know. But it's it kind of fell off for a minute, but luckily, you know, some of the legendary, you know, cats like, you know, Ken Swift and many of the Zulu Nation and Rocksteady crew and others, you know, hung on to it, took it underground and found understudies and continued to make it grow, you know, and it kind of, ever since, it's been kind of underground still, you know. I mean, I still consider it pretty much underground, but there, it looks like breaking's going to be in the Olympics in 2024, you know, so that's pretty wild, you know. I believe it's 2024. But it's not this next one, but the following Olympics that it'll be in. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Because athletic wise, it's like they're on the, like, B-boys and B-girls are on the level of world-class gymnasts.
Oh, straight up. There's no question.
But it's like what you're talking about.
But it's not all about big moves.
Yep, exactly. It's like,
it's also a dance, and, you know, like, when has a dance been anything that's been part of the Olympics?
Yeah.
You know, so there's a lot of controversy about it, you know.
Yeah.
But and you know, I got mixed feelings about it, but I feel like just like skateboarding, how it went big with the X Games and all that,
Yeah.
like you're always going to have authentic skaters. You're always going to have authentic
Yep.
breakers.
No
So that's
doubt.
never going to die, you know, but hopefully we'll get more of them now
Yeah.
because now we'll have more exposure and maybe, you know, finally folks will be validated for what they do, you know.
No
People
doubt.
can make a living, you know, doing what they do like Tony Hawk does now, you know. I
Yeah.
mean, breakers should be able to make a living off of what they do as well, you know. It's an extreme, like the amount of discipline and the amount of integrity that you have to hang on to it. Like I always tell the breakers, like, man, you guys are doing something that's really profound, you know, because, you know, if you're a baseball player or a basketball player or a football player, well, at every school they encourage you to do that, and um, they have a whole program that's built around that you can step into and you can be involved in, and it's something that's done, you know, as part
Get
of.
coaches, you get scholarships, a varsity
Yeah,
letter.
yeah. I mean, that's such a big part of athletics, but breaking's not a part of any of that. So what that means is that you have to take it upon yourself
Yeah.
to learn and to find folks that can teach you different things. And so you have to be proactive, and you have to have the discipline to make it happen, and the passion and the heart to do
That's
it, you know,
true.
and to create these things, you know. And so that's it's a really a pretty amazing thing, you know.
No doubt.
And it's just, yeah. So but you know, it's also the beauty of why it's remained as authentic as it has, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, it's always been kind of an underground thing. So anyways, I've been veering off a whole lot, but
No, man, I
breaking,
feel
that was my
That's
first love.
This interview was dope on so many levels. I apologize. It took me a month to get it out on social media. Thank you, Carlos, for your wisdom, man. You really opened my mind up to broaden my perspective of the history of hip hop from a more Puerto Rican perspective, to understand the connection to rockin and mambo and salsa. And to hear your story was just a blessing, man. I'm glad we have crossed paths. And I just reflect Carlos's, you know, disposition as being like a 38-year-old learning from 16, 17-year-olds how to break, and just that openness to want to learn. I carry that as an educator and an artist as well. So stay tuned for part 2. We're going to get more into the graffiti art element and hear about Morpheus Youth Project. So check that coming soon. Peace.